Hi there and welcome back to MassiveSynth.com tutorials. This is part 4 in the series we've been doing this month based around making an electro track using Massive as much as possible really, so making the bass patch, the sub, the lead, the ARP, all the sounds what you heard there apart from the drums really, making them all with Massive and processing them. So in part 3 of this tutorial we showed you how to make this lead sound. And in this final part of the series, we're going to show you how to process that lead, also do some processing on the bass, do some compression with the bass, and a little bit of EQ, what I didn't really get into in the last, or the second part of this series where we looked at making the bass patch, and also show you at the end how to make this ARP sound. So let's start off with this lead, and if you followed part 3's tutorial, we made this sound. There's one thing I forgot to add actually, was using this envelope modulation to kind of this envelope here to modulate the cutoff frequency. We could also use this to modulate the amp of the noise, to bring a bit of noise into the sound. So it just adds a kind of really kind of crisp, bright, like sort of top end to the sound if I turn it off. This is quite a nice sort of top end on there, so without having to boost too much EQ in that area, we've actually just added ourselves a bit of noise. So one first thing to do with processing this sound is what we could do with the bass really, and just kind of bounce it down to audio. It might be a bit easier to treat it like that. So I've actually got a big roll off on the bottom end now on the EQ, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to bypass that, bounce the audio, and then put that back on the audio channel. So hold down Control and hit B, and then we'll bounce this piece of audio out. And let's bring that EQ, what we had there, let's bring that back onto this audio channel and bypass it. And yeah, so here's our audio basically. And so one thing I wanted to do with this was first compress it and then add a bit of sidechain compression as well, just to kind of move it, kind of duck it out of the way of the kick drum, so the kick drum really kind of punches through this mix. So first off, we can look in dynamics and compressor and just compress this lead sound really. And I don't want to, looking at that audio, it's not too all over the place, so I don't want to go too crazy with this compression. Just tame some of the dynamics a little bit and just make it a bit fuller and maybe a bit louder in some areas. So I'm going to keep this circuit type as platinum here and back the attack right off. So maybe about halfway. Push the release back as well. I don't want the attack too sharp, or same with the release. I want to keep the sort of dynamics of the sound, keep the attack on that kind of synth sound going. So put this ratio down, do about 3/1 for the ratio. Keep the knee around about there, kind of 0.6, 0.7. I'm going to keep it on RMS rather than peak, and then I'm going to use this, take this makeup gain off, and use this threshold here to just bring a bit of and then if we maybe go to this loudest point of the synth and just bypass. If we look down here, we could probably use a bit of makeup gain really, just to boost that signal back up again. Maybe about 2 dB will do. So yeah, there we go, we just got a bit of compression on there. It's quite subtle really, you could go a bit more crazy with that depending on the sort of sound you were going for, but I'm always an advocate for just trying to get the sound as tight as possible within the synth first, rather than worrying about too many effects later. They should enhance the sound really, rather than save it from the way you're processing it. So I think that for this purpose that will be fine. I mean, you could add a bit more distortion or even more extreme compression, but sounding quite nice. So next thing to do really is add a sidechain compression. So And it's important to note really to add this sidechain compression after the compression. So if we were going to, once we're sidechaining it, if we're compressing it after the sidechain, we're undoing that sidechain function. The ducking in the audio signal is actually being reduced if we put the compressor after the sidechain compressor. So when you're sidechaining, it's always good practice to have the sidechain as one of the last things in your plugin chain really. So select the sidechain trigger here that we set up in one of the earlier tutorials, and let's just go for really kind of fast attack and release settings. Do another ratio 3:1. Put it on peak as well for this sidechain, and let's loop this with the kick drum and the sidechain trigger. Take this makeup gain off. I think that's too extreme really. We don't want too much kind of sidechain compression going on with this synth because we've rolled all the bottom end off. It shouldn't be interfering with the kick drum too much, but we just want to duck it a little bit so the kick drum really pumps through this mix, because it is an electro track. We want that pumping sort of sidechain thing going on. So got -3 on the threshold there, and that should be fine. Let's give it a spin. Cool. So let's go and look at this bass, what we've got here, and let's give this a bit of, because all we've done so far to this bass is do a bit of side chaining. So let's add a bit of compression to this bass, just kind of like, not loads, because again I look at that audio and I think it doesn't need loads of compression really. It's quite a smooth sort of signal, but it's had a bit of compression and a bit of EQ, roll some of the bottom end off and just kind of boost some of the mids just to kind of make it punch through the mix a bit more. So add a EQ, just roll the bottom off. Just when I'm looking at kind of EQing sort of bass sounds, look at the kick drum. And I think most of the energy kind of dips off after about 125 Hz. So for this bass EQ, I'm going to roll it off up to around similar sort of level really, about 125, so 135 there. Just so it's kind of out of the way of the kick drum, and we've got the sub taking care of that lower frequency anyway, so we just want to roll that off the bass. And I'll solo this with the side chain. And maybe we could just boost some EQ there on the mids to this bass, just to bring some of those mids out, help it just kind of punch through the mix a bit more. So solo that with a kick drum. Get the sub in there. And it's only just a subtle amount of mids that we're introducing into that bass sound, but it's just helping kind of bring it out really, sort of. You know, you can kind of hear the sort of tone of it a little bit more there. So next thing we could do with this bass is add a compressor, and we've got the side chain here. I'm going to make sure that the compressor is inserted before that side chain. At least compressor, and let's solo the bass here. So I just want quite a subtle amount of compression again, like we did with the synth. So I'm going to keep the attack around about 10 milliseconds. Have the release a little bit more, around about 20, but nothing too kind of sharp or too slow really. So it's makeup going off. too much. Just a couple of dB will be fine, really. So we've got about 3 or 4 dB in some areas of the bass getting compressed. Probably introduce a bit more gain as well there, because we've dropped quite with a couple of dB sort of reduction in the overall gain of the signal, so we can bring that back in here. This is quite subtle, but the bass is just sounding a bit more fuller now with that kind of compression added in. So I mean, we could take things one step further with this bass sound and add a bit of distortion, and it's all up to you. It's a kind of matter of taste whether you added that before or after a compressor, or even before an EQ, because it will have, the more EQ'd signal goes into the distortion, the bigger effect it will have on the sound. So no EQ, you're going to be distorting the bottom end a lot more, or you can EQ afterwards. It's all, you know, it's all about where you insert that distortion really in the plug-in chain, into kind of how it affects the sound. But I was just going to insert it here and show you this Fabfilter Saturn. I do love this distortion unit, and I just tend to use this kind of this basic saturator preset. This basic saturator preset, which is quite nice. So just gives the sound, just gives it a really nice tone. So bringing some really nice harmonics out in the sound. But you know, if you don't have that that unit, or if you don't have the Fabfilter Saturn unit, or you want to use like Ableton's kind of native plugins or Logic's, you know, any kind of distortion unit in any of these kind of major sort of DAWs will do a good job. I mean, this distortion too I quite like. It's not massively used by a lot of people, but that can add some really nice sort of crunch and stuff to a bass sound if you wanted to use it. So let's give that a little spin and see how that's sounding. Okay, so next we can do the ARP sound basically. So rather than remake this from scratch like I do with some tutorials, just because of time constraints, I was going to show you quickly how I put this sound together. So you notice there's quite a big roll off on the EQ there, just rolling a lot of the bottom end and kind of lower mids off that signal, just because there's a lot of stuff going on with the bass sound and the kick drum and the sub and stuff down there. I just wanted to kind of get the ARP. It's just kind of like enhancing the lead sound. It's just the top end sound really. So what we did for this sound, we've got two oscillators. We've got this additive octaves here. We've got it on bend plus with wavetable position intensity just past halfway, amps on full. It's routed to both filters, but we're only using filter 1 for the sound. We pitched it down by 1 octave. Oscillator 2, we've got a rough math 2 waveform. Bend minus plus. Intensity is intensity just before halfway. The wavetable position is kind of about 3/4, and the amp of this second oscillator is just pulled down to about 3/4 of the way up. And this is pitch plus 7, just to give us a nice sort of kind of electro-y sort of chord inversion there with the pitch. And we've got a bandpass filter here on filter 1. And what I've done for this bandpass, to give it that sweep, I've actually used this envelope here. So I've dragged this envelope modulating the cutoff frequency to the first modulation slot, you know, click and drag up all the way, and then with this envelope is controlling this cutoff frequency, and it's set quite a relatively sort of high resonance just past halfway. The bandwidth's just past halfway, and then I've got this really slow attack, and this is just kind of giving this sound this kind of bandpass sweep as you kind of just sweeps through the frequencies there, which is quite nice. So the amp envelope, I don't think I really touched that when I put this sound together. Added some dimension expander, some reverb, a bit of EQ, a bit of high shelf, and then the arpeggiator here. So just get this first LFO, I just made this into a stepper and dragged the crosshair of this to the pitch modulation slot of both the oscillators here. You know, just click and drag up to +12. And then the settings I have here, the ratio is 1/16, so it's synced, and I've got +12 for the first step, +7, +3, and then 0, and then we're getting that kind of nice arpeggiated sound. And so when you're using arpeggiators like that within a track, it's important to make sure that they're going to be in key with your track. So the kind of the notes we've got here, this is the root is G, and it's a G minor scale what we're using. So I just was kind of careful of you staying within a minor scale using these notes really, +7, +3, +12. So yeah, and this, you know, it's playing a G3 note, so it's in key with the rest of the sounds we've got going on there. Okay, so that's the end of this series really, putting this electro track together in Massive. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. It was a bit different from the normal stuff that we're doing, so you know, any feedback or thoughts on what you'd like to see going forward, then please get in touch and let us know. And yeah, thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon. Cheers, bye.